Hello, my name is Monica Stevens. I am an intercultural trainer and consultant. My company is MES Consulting Services. And what I do is try to create links between cultures when I deal with people who actually are going to move to another country. Let's say Americans who are moving to England or Japanese people who are moving to Mexico and so forth. And also when people work within a multicultural team. It's extremely important to remember that diversity is here and it's probably going to stay among us. Now, let's start talking a little bit about the United States. Did you know that there are 195 countries in the world and that the United States is the most diverse? For example, US companies have employees who speak over 30 different languages, and some cultural differences affect how we do things, how we view time, how quiet or how talkative we are, and even how we work or how we study. In the last few years, globalization has brought us all together to go on vacation, to do business, or to study abroad. That is why it is so important to understand people from other cultures, to learn how to interact with them, and to enjoy the differences between us. It is important to remember that no culture is better than other, and that we all have different motivations, experiences, and priorities. Knowing that we are all different makes life more interesting and fun. In some countries, dealing with other cultures has been done for years and even centuries. That is the case of Europe, where countries are geographically located side by side, and this has allowed them to trade, to fight, to sign agreements, and to visit one another for thousands of years. Something that can help us understand others is empathy. Have you heard the term? It refers to the ability to put yourself in someone else's place in order to understand how they think, act, and feel. And this is especially useful when dealing with other cultures. So, how can we successfully interact with people from other countries in school or at work? There are a number of ways we can achieve our goal. For example, by being friendly and by showing interest in their language, their history, and even their laws, because even laws can differ from one country to another. Did you know that? I recently came back from Greece, and in order to travel more effectively, I learned a few phrases in Greek. Of course, I don't speak the language, but I tried my best to learn how to say thank you, how much is this, even where is the toilet, things like that. And in one of the shops, a man got very, very happy to hear me saying something because he said that just the fact that I was making an effort to say something in their language showed respect, and the service they gave us at the shop and the smiles that we saw showed that the people were getting very, very happy to see that we were actually trying to understand and respect the culture. And this is just one example. Two or three phrases in another language go a long way. Now, another way that we can achieve the goal of getting along better with other cultures is by realizing that different does not mean less capable or less intelligent. Usually, people who have an accent is simply an indication that this person speaks more than one language. And this is something worth remembering. Also, another way that we can get along with people from other cultures is by finding points in common. We all have something to share. Learning that we share some of the same holidays, for example, how many countries celebrate Christmas, how many countries celebrate Mother's Day, or even the same foods, how many countries like to eat, for example, tortillas, how many countries like to eat the same type of dishes, and that we even have the same shops and restaurants. You can have McDonald's in many other countries. You can find TGIF in many countries. It's amazing. Places where you don't expect to find things that are truly American surprise us sometimes. By asking questions or finding out something about other cultures, for example, did you know that the color television was invented by a Mexican engineer in Mexico in 1940? Or that the first ATM was invented in England in 1967? Or that board games such as chess were invented in India in the 6th century? If you like chocolate, let me tell you that the cocoa bean used to produce chocolate came from the ancient Mayans in Mexico approximately 2,000 years ago. However, chocolate bars were invented in England in 1847. When you show that you know something about the other person's culture or history, you make that person welcome in this country, and you yourself look much better informed. You are worthy of admiration by people from other countries when they realize that you actually know something about their country, or that you have taken the trouble to find out something about them. It makes them feel important, and the relationship from then on goes more smoothly. When we deal with people from other cultures, there are certain specific differences that we must be aware of. There are studies that describe what the main differences between cultures are. The studies published by Dutch scientist Gert Hofstede and American anthropologist Edward T. Hall show us how people behave and react depending on where they are from. The first of these dimensions is the uncertainty avoidance index. What is this? Well, this refers to how willing people are to say no openly. Cultures high in uncertainty avoidance index include Latin America and India. In these countries, denying or saying no to something you offer or something you ask them to do is extremely difficult. They feel they're putting themselves on the spot, so usually they answer yes, even if they're not going to do it, because their index is very high in the uncertainty avoidance. So people from these cultures tend to place emotion over logic, and they become very suspicious of situations that they don't know well. The US in general is very low in the dimension of uncertainty avoidance, except when they travel abroad. Because of the lack of information about other cultures, sometimes people travel abroad and they don't want to really go out by themselves or to go to a museum or try other foods because they don't know exactly what's going on. That is, if we go back to what we said at the beginning, why it is so important to learn something about other cultures. Now, another dimension from Dr. Hofstede and Dr. Hall are individualism versus collectivism. Families in some cultures are extremely close together. This is the case, for example, of Korea, China, Japan, and of course, Latin America. So these are called collective societies. On the other hand, the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Switzerland, and Belgium are what we call individualistic societies, where the needs of one person supersedes the needs of the family or the group. These are cultures where people are very individualistic. They separate very early from their families, whereas in India and Latin America, families stay together for many, many years. Individualistic societies produce people who are independent and autonomous. What does this mean? They make decisions by themselves without having to submit to the approval by a group or by their family. In fact, in the United States, we have the most individualistic society in the world. We mostly all say I and not we when we make a decision or do something. If you notice somebody asks at a meeting, can you do this? I say, I promise, I offer, I agree. In other cultures like Japan, they're going to say, we are going to talk about it and we will let you know what we're thinking. There was a case of an interview with an engineer from Latin America, and during the interview, the American interviewer asked him, so what part of this project were you in charge of? And this engineer, who was speaking now in English, said, we did this and that. So the American interviewer again said, no, no, no. What were you personally in charge of? And again, this engineer answered, as I was telling you, we did this, we did that. So he wasn't hired. What was the problem there? Okay, this was a cultural issue. This engineer is not used to saying, I did this, I did that, because to him that sounded extremely individualistic, presumptuous, and he thought that he should politely say we out of respect for the other people in the company. On the other hand, the interviewer, who is from the United States, the most individualistic society in the world, assumed that he had done nothing by himself and that he needed to consult, or that he needed to be able to receive orders from others. So it didn't work out. So just bear that in mind. Another measure, another index that is extremely interesting is the high context versus low context cultures. In high context cultures like Latin America, India, and Italy, people need to become friends with colleagues at work in order to be able to work effectively. They also use a lot of body language. When they're talking, they're going to be using their hands and they're going to explain things and no, 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 of course, yes. So they have to use body language and become very, very close socially with the people they work with in order for them to work effectively. Okay, so low context cultures, which is exactly the opposite, see no need to become actually close friends with their colleagues at work. That is, working together does not mean that they are also friends. Okay, so when you work with someone in a collective society like Latin America, people tend to say happy birthday. They always invite other colleagues to their parties. They all use time to say hello in the morning. How was your weekend? In the individualistic societies and the high and low context societies, which there's very little body language and they don't have to become friends, they simply say good morning, they go to work and then they leave, and you can be hearing people in these societies organizing a party and you will not expect them to invite you, because being a colleague doesn't mean that they're your friends. And that is something that we need to remember, because it causes a lot of aggravation. The high context culture employee is going to feel alienated and is going to feel that the other person doesn't like him, and that's not the case. You know, the low context employee is going to think, well, you're my, this person's my colleague. That doesn't mean we're friends. So you be very careful with that, okay? Communication with low context cultures like the United States, like England, like Germany, is usually very straightforward and clear. So when the two groups interact, Low context culture people find it extremely difficult to read that which the high context culture people are trying to express because of the involvement of body language. If they say, for example, a low context person says, are you okay with the solution that we offered? And the high context culture goes, yeah. I mean, they're hearing, yes, but the body language is telling them, no, I don't think so. I'm not in agreement with this. So it's very difficult for low context culture people to read the body language of the high context culture people. So that is something that must be taken into account when you are trying to communicate with people from a very different culture, as in this case, okay? All right, and so the next one that is, this one, I like this one because I've had problems with this one myself. You know, when you have polychronic versus monochronic societies. Okay, a polychronic society is a society where time is irrelevant. There is absolutely no need to rush. Why do you want me to come on time? Please stay longer. Time is completely irrelevant. That is the case, for example, of Italy, Ireland, Latin America, the Arabic countries. And then you have the monochronic societies where time is money, time is of the essence, time is respecting others. You must never be late. You must never stay late. If you say something is going to be done by one, it better be done by one. Whereas the previous example I gave you, the polychronic cultures, if you want to have something ready, you're going to have to ask several times because to them, 1 o'clock is going to be the same as 2, 3, or tomorrow. There is actually a very interesting word in Spanish, in Mexican Spanish, called ahorita. This ahorita, which actually should mean now, means in a moment, in an hour, tomorrow, never. So you have to be extremely careful with that. Now, what is the situation in the United States? Well, time is extremely important in the United States, in Germany, and in the UK. So people are always on time. Okay, these monochronic cultures have time that is exact, limited, precious, extremely important, and therefore it should not be wasted. In Latin America, India, Spain, and Saudi Arabia, all polychronic cultures, time is not so important and people are less punctual. They arrive late and they stay late as well. In these polychronic cultures, people work more by objectives than based on a timeline. Also, these cultures have people who don't have a problem multitasking. That is, doing several things at the same time, and interruptions are not a problem. They're very well tolerated. Let's use an example. You go to a shop in the United States or in Germany or in England, and the shop assistant is already talking to one of the clients, or one of the customers. You ask a question and they are going to either ignore you or feel extremely offended. Why? Because you're interrupting what they're doing with the other customer. If you do that exactly the same in Latin America or any polychronic culture, the shop assistant will take a second to turn around, give you an answer, and carry on talking to the customer. The customer, if the customer is from the same culture as the shop assistant, will also take the interruption well and will not take offense or be angry. That is a huge difference, okay? Now, let us use an example of polychronic, collective, high context cultures like Latin America, Italy, Greece, Africa, the Arabic countries, China, India, and Pakistan. Let's talk a little bit about who they are. Well, they are the largest group in the world. They amount to 3.7 billion people, more than half the world population. They do not, as we said, pay much attention to time, and they are very casual and they love to party. Family members of any age, it could be a great grandfather, are very important when making decisions. And more than anything, in these countries, there really is no generation gap. And that is something very interesting, because if you go to a meeting and in the meeting you have a very old person sitting there and you obviously address the younger executives, probably those younger executives are going to consult with the older person, and if that person did not feel taken into account, you are going to have a problem there, okay? Now, also, this group of people, they are very lively and they are very talkative. They're creative, they're imaginative, and they use a lot of body language. They shake hands, they cuddle, they kiss. That was a bit of a problem during the pandemic because they couldn't get close to each other. But in some countries, for example, in Italy, you kiss both cheeks. And they also have, in Mexico, they have this embrace where you shake hands, then you hug, and then you shake hands again when you are very familiar with the person already. So they're very touchy, they're very warm, and that is different from cultures in which you barely shake hands, because the distance between people is extremely important. Another important point when dealing with other cultures is why it is so important to learn a foreign language. Remember, we mentioned that at the beginning today. Now, apart from when you travel and you at least say a couple of phrases to look well, there are a number of reasons, okay? First of all, you are more in control when you travel to other countries, or even when you are at a business meeting when people from another country speak a different language. So it gives you greater confidence. This is what happens. You assume, and correctly so, that everybody speaks English because English is taught all over the world and is the de facto language of business. But if you go to any country where English is not their native language, eventually they will revert to their own language to explain something or to agree on something. So you will be left out in the cold. When you are able to speak the local language, you will be able to understand what they are talking about. So it's very important for you to be in control, especially when you are at a meeting. You don't want people talking, and it happens always. Somebody didn't understand something, or somebody wants to clarify a point really fast, they turn around and revert to their own language. When you also speak that language, you do not lose anything at the meeting. So it's extremely important to be able to speak something, something else. Now, you can also learn more about the other culture because there are phrases that are just, prevalent in other cultures that are difficult to translate. So when you're able to speak something, then it's very convenient for you to feel more at ease and more accepted and more at home when you speak a little bit of the other language or the place where you are. You are not dependent on whether they want to translate for you or how well or how much they're willing to do it. So you're not depending on whereas somebody else is going to translate for you. You yourself can control understanding or not. Now, also something that is even more important, your image improves before the other culture. People from other cultures like it very much when you try to speak their language. So you make friends more easily. Remember, we were talking about cultures where a colleague or a business acquaintance becomes a friend. And when they become a friend, for these cultures, it's important to make friends in order to do business successfully. some of these cultures, if they don't feel you are their friend, they are not going to trust you. In fact, in some cultures, uh, you try to establish a business relationship, which you can do online now with all this modern technology, and they will not accept that. Why don't we get together? Why don't you come and visit? We'd love to take you to try our foods, and we'd love to show you, all our city. They want to look at you in the eye personally in order for them to trust you. So if you add to that the fact that you speak some other language, you really have a great advantage when you're trying to do business, okay? And you don't have to be totally fluent, but even a few words go a long way, okay? And the most important reason to learn a foreign language, believe it or not, learning a foreign language improves your memory skills. So there is no downside to actually learning a foreign language. Now, I hope you're enjoying this presentation. I know it's not very long, but I think it has enough content for you to think about the advantages of understanding other cultures, considering the fact that it might be good to learn a foreign language, reading a little about another culture. Maybe you have people in your classroom or executives who work with you who are from somewhere else, and now you'll be thinking, oh, so that's why he or she does this. I never thought about it. So it's a great way to understand and get along better, both at school and in an office. So finally, so how would you like to be a global leader when you grow up? And I'm talking now to the students who are watching this presentation. And who can be a global leader in today's global economy? Well, anyone who understands and accepts that people from other cultures, religions, and ethnicities can effectively work with colleagues from other cultures for the common good of their organization or their school. A global leader is anyone who learns and cares about what is happening in the world. Remember, watching the news from other places is very, very convenient, because when you're with people, you can actually say, oh, by the way, I read that there was a tsunami here. Oh, by the way, I heard that you just have a new prime minister. When people realize they are taken into account, and I think that goes for any type of culture, not just the high context societies. Everybody wants to feel that they are important to you in a personal manner, even if they're not from a high context society. The fact that you know a little bit about their culture goes a long way. So someone who is willing to become well informed on international issues in order to make the right decisions is somebody who is going to be better prepared to do business or to get along with people from other cultures. Okay, so well, I want to thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions, I'm sure you'll be able to get to get my email, or I'll give it to you as stevenscrosscultural@yahoo.com. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to send me a message. Just on the subject line, put Global Trade Mission, and then you tell me what you want to find out, and I'll be more than glad to help you. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your probably this afternoon. I'm sorry I'm recording this from outside. Okay, you take care. Bye-bye.